Welcome back. Here's the election according to the newest polls, and let's start with the safe states which have already filled in. We can now move on to Nevada, and we're only 5 weeks away from the election now, and Harris is leading in the estimate by 1.4%, which is better off from last week. And the latest poll from TIPP has Harris winning by 1%, which is the latest one by far. That means we gotta give this as a narrow. Still no, actually, it's not a narrow victory. Technically speaking, it's a lean victory for Harris by just above a 1% margin, so a better polling week for Harris in this week. And now for Arizona. In this border state, Trump leads by 1.1% in the 538 estimate, and the latest poll from Atlas Intel also has Trump winning by 1%, but if you average those out, that does mean a Trump victory barely by a lean margin. Kind of similar to Nevada, but for the GOP. And now for Alaska, which has no new polling, unfortunately, so we gotta go with the latest poll, which was from a couple weeks ago, and still a likely victory for the GOP. For New Mexico, I'm pretty sure I checked. Yep, the latest poll was from Survey USA from a couple weeks ago now, so nothing much there. So likely D victory still. And now for a battleground state in 2024 for Texas. And this beacon for the GOP, Trump leads by 6.1% in the 538 estimate. We actually just got these new polls from Triple P, actually. That's interesting. I actually wasn't expecting these. I'm making the video. Thankfully, it only says a Trump victory by 5%, so doesn't change my margin. So yeah, that's barely a likely state for Republicans, but yeah, okay, nice. That has never happened before, but yeah. And just new polls coming in the middle of a video, so that's nice. So yeah, likely our victory for Republicans there. And now for Florida, the home state of Trump and the GOP, basically. Trump, of course, still leads in the estimate by 4.1%. And yep, Triple P back at it again. Similar margin to the estimate, so Trump still wins here almost by a likely margin, but still a 4-point margin. So yeah, lean R victory for him in that state. And now for Georgia, so an important state for anyone to win in 2024. Back to the Peach State, that is extremely narrow. 538 estimate only has this as a Trump victory by 0.7%. And Atlas, yet again, who had a polling dump just a few days ago actually, have this as a Trump victory by only 1%, but still 1%. That does mean that it still is, yeah, that would still mean a tilt margin for Donald Trump. So it's not a lean. So yeah, that means a Trump victory here by less than 1%. So a tilt margin. Now for North Carolina, another southern state, and this southern state is actually even closer. As you can see, the estimate barely has Trump winning here by 0.1%, which is actually kind of crazy though. And ooh, okay, we got another new poll, nice, from East Carolina University Center, and they have Trump winning by 2%, which actually kind of helps them. And that means in the average, if we average those out, that does give Trump a victory by a lean margin of barely 1%. But yeah, he still wins here, although it's extremely close. And state you gotta look out for polling, just like Georgia and all these swing states. And now for Virginia, a state that the GOP wants to flip in 2024. Not too much of a change since last week. Estimate has this as a 6.7 Harris win. And the latest poll from Emerson, another new poll. Nice. Poll dump in the middle of a video. Let's go. We got Harris winning here by 7%. So estimate, average that out. Basically almost the same thing as the 538 estimate on it on the website. And Virginia goes by a likely D margin for the Democrats, of course. And now we can you know what, let's actually go to New York briefly. And the polling industry is barely edging out the safe D margin category, because the latest poll from Emerson, which is not from less than a week ago, actually has Harris barely winning here by 14%, but still, that does definitely mean a safety margin. Okay, that was weird, a technical glitch, but sorry about that. We can now move on bit more to the northeast actually. So New Hampshire estimate shows Harris winning here by around a 7.1% margin. Latest poll is still from a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, no new poll for people in New Hampshire, so that means likely D victory in here for Harris, of course. And now for Maine. In Maine, unfortunately, let me check. Yep, no new poll. So Maine at large is a likely D margin, just like last video, while the 2nd district is a likely R margin, just like the previous video from last week. And now we can move on to the Rust Belt and the most important part probably in this election. So let's start off briefly for Iowa. Fortunately, no new Seltzer poll, but expect to get one by the end of October, since they usually always do that, and that's by far the most accurate one they give to us in the election season time. Still, that means a lean R victory, because the last poll from them has this as a Trump victory by 4%. Technically speaking, it's not my margin, but I gotta respect the video. And now for Minnesota. Minnesota estimate barely has this as a likely D victory for Harris by 5.9%. Latest poll from Survey USA from a week ago has this as a 6% margin. So yeah, you can just briefly put this likely D, not likely R. And 2nd district, where we actually got a few more polls actually from New York Times. CNN actually showing almost a safe D victory for Harris in the 2nd district. Still, it does mean it's still a likely D margin. It's not, I think the last one was, 5% victory for Harris, barely likely D margin, but we don't have an estimate, but probably would have been like 7, 8, 9% victory for Harris. Still no change in the map, likely D victory by 7 to 9% for Harris, I'm guessing. And now for Ohio, estimate has slightly dipped down for the GOP down to 8.8, still will be a resounding victory if that's the margin. Latest poll from CNN and New York Times has this a victory of only 6% for the GOP here, which is interesting, but still, if that means if we average those out, that is a 7% margin victory for Donald Trump and JD Vance in 2024, which wouldn't be surprising. I think that's a fair margin, but yeah. We can now move on to the purple part of the Rust Belt, and let's start off with Wisconsin actually. For the Badger State, Harris and Walz are winning in the estimate by 1.8%. The latest poll, says from August? What? I'm gonna make an executive decision moving on to technically the latest one from less than a week ago. New York Times, Siena has this as a victory for Harris by 2%, which I agree more. And I think that doesn't really change the margin which poll I use, but the latest poll, technically speaking, is from New York Times and Siena. They have that as a 2% victory for Harris, and the estimate is 1.8, so a victory margin for Harris here by 1.9%, which is interesting and more in a flip from the last video. We can now move on to Michigan. In a similar fashion, Harris is winning here by almost 2%, technically 1.8%. If it moves on, yes. And the latest poll, the New York Times, yet again, and Siena actually has this as an even race, which is extremely interesting. So, because this is an even race, this does mean, technically speaking, Michigan would move down from a lean D margin down to a tilt margin in this new update. So, yeah, that's why I don't trust that many polls from Wisconsin, because they do tend to lean a bit to the left, but yeah, that's just my personal preference. And now for Pennsylvania. Inside the Keystone State, Harris barely leads by 0.8% in the 538 estimate against Donald Trump. And the latest poll from Patriot Polling, Patriot Polling has Trump actually winning here by 1%. So that does mean that Pennsylvania, due to those polls from Patriot Polling, Trafalgar, and Atlas, it would actually drop from a tilt D margin in 2024 to a tilt R margin in this update 5 weeks away from the election. This means Trump and Vance won with 281 electoral votes, while Harris gets 257 electoral votes. Here's the update between week 6 and week 5 away from the election. please feel free to leave a like, join the channel membership, leave your actual map below, and have a good one.